because I'm not sort of in academia, I'm not worried about tenure. There's a kind of openness that I can do about what I'm writing about, how I'm writing about it, and what places I'm writing and talking about it. But it's been a long time coming. I think that was one of the reasons why I like sort of moved away from academia, is that I wanted to have these more forthright, more forthcoming conversations about popular culture and sort of feeling emboldened and not restricted or self-censoring, which the kind of like respectability and professionalization that sort of the departments and deans and sort of kinds of rules and regulations surrounding the university, I always felt that they were a little constricting to the kind of work that I was doing. But again,
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room podcast. Happy summer season. It's Dr. Andrew Rimby, aka Andrew, and I am so excited for you all to listen to what I hope you'll find to be a really enjoyable episode. So, before the episode begins, I just want to remind you all to please follow us on our YouTube channel, Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Make sure you rate us on Apple and give us a review. It really means a lot. You also can rate us on Spotify. If you need help doing any of that, as always, you can feel free to reach out to me, DM me on any of our social media accounts. I'm looking at them every day. Patreon, we have ad-free episodes and bonus content, patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room, and you get a 1 week free trial. We also have our book club, which is free and virtual. So, this month, well, technically August, we are reading The Silent Patient, which is such an exciting psychological thriller, I've been told by the book club members who voted on it. August 3rd at 5 p.m. Email me at ivorytowerboilerroom@gmail.com for the Zoom link, or DM me and I'll get you the Zoom link. And I can't wait for us to discuss The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. So, without further ado, here is today's Ivory Tower Boiler Room episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. It is Dr. Andrew Rimby here with a repeat guest, a fellow PhD in English from Rutgers University, Dr. Manuel Betancourt. So, when I last had him on, we talked about his book, The Male Gazed, which was just such a summery, delightful episode. I was finishing my dissertation. I was like using his work in my dissertation. So, I feel like I can breathe after my PhD. He now has a new book called Hello Stranger, Musings on Modern Intimacies. If you don't know Manuel, you should. He's a Los Angeles based queer Colombian writer and film critic. He's always on Larry Mantle's Film Week. He writes for Variety, Vulture, the AV Club, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, Esquire, the Atlantic, the Los Angeles Review of Books. And I'm just so happy for him to be back on so we can talk all things queer culture, maybe some politics. We'll see. The news is a little tiring right now, so I don't know if we need to dig into that. And we're going to look a little at Queer as Folk, episodes 14 and 15. So, welcome back, Manuel.
thank you for having me.
Yes, so I have to just, catch up with you and know, did you know, I know you had told me a little that you were working on Hello Stranger, but how did this project come about after The Male Gazed?
Yeah, so right before, not right before, but like as we were making plans for the male gaze to be published, and that was like summer 23, I knew that I wanted to have another project sort of in the pipeline. Like I wanted to make sure that like whatever happened with the male gaze, whether it was well received, bad received, sales, or like if no one read it, that I would have something else to sort of keep me focused. And so I actually sold Hello Stranger before Male Gazed even came out, and I was writing it. And so when I was doing a lot of press, it was just I was half doing press and half trying to finish it. And the idea was like I always wanted to write about this film that I'm obsessed with called Closer. And the original pitch for the book was I just wanted to write an entire book about that film and intimacies and Julia Roberts and Natalie Portman and sort of the ways that film sort of depicts relationships and sort of the limits of relationships. And it soon became clear that that's not a feasible project, that not enough people have seen the film, that it's not quite. And my editor was actually like, I think you have like bigger ambitions, and sort of there's a broader project to be mined here. And so we retooled it, and I sort of went back to the drawing board. And Closer is still sort of the inspiration behind it, but then it became a book about intimacy and about strangers and about sort of the ways in which we can start rethinking about how we think about our own types of relationships, and the kinds of connections that we make with others, whether they're fleeting or casual or whether they're more long term. So that was a little bit the genesis of it all.
Well, and you also have listening to you on That's a Gay Ass podcast. You also have become a quite a salacious conversationalist about your personal life, Manuel. It not the same Manuel that I remember when I interviewed you with the male gazed.
I think I'm still quite reticent. I think it was one of those like, well, if I was gonna go on That's a Gay Ass podcast, it would like I knew that I would have to be more forthcoming. But I still, even when I was writing Hello Stranger, which does deal with a little bit more salacious content, there's a chapter on cruising, there's a chapter on sexting. Um, it was also like as soon as I realized that I was not realized, as soon as I decided that I was going to write this book, I knew that it would require a kind of forthrightness on
Mm.
my own behalf for the book to land, for the ideas to feel fleshed out, in ways both literal and figurative. And so, but I'm still, yeah, I was having this conversation a few weeks ago at another book event because they were like, you reveal so much of yourself, and I'm like, actually, I don't. Like, it's doled out. There's
Mm.
specific moments, but I think if you add them up, I don't feel like I've. Maybe it's because I feel like I kept so much to myself that there's still not a lot that made it into the book. That I feel it was very the kind of reticence
Mm.
on my behalf.
Do you feel that you've uh, flew or thrown away that academic regalia, or is that PhD mindedness? I mean, it still seeps through with your cultural, like even etymology of what the word stranger. Like you give us this really nice deep dive of like thinking about the syntax of stranger and our proximity to that idea.
Yeah, I think what I realized is that I can bring the kind of rigor that academia taught me and that I really enjoy, those kinds of close readings that I love doing. But because I'm not sort of in academia, I'm not worried about tenure, there's a kind of openness that I can do about what I'm writing about, how I'm writing about it, and what places I'm writing and talking about it. But it's been a long time coming. I think that was one of the reasons why I like sort of moved away from academia is that I wanted to have these more forthright, more forthcoming conversations about popular culture and sort of feeling emboldened and not restricted or self-censoring, which the kind of like respectability and professionalization that sort of the departments and deans and sort of kinds of rules and regulations surrounding the university. I always felt that they were a little constricting to the kind
Mhm.
of work that I was doing. But again, I did an entire undergraduate thesis about cruising. And so I've already, or even within my academic world, I was already sort of not half outside it, but it was already like pushing the limits of what kinds of things I wanted to write about and think about.
Well, and now you have three books, and Hello Stranger is available also at any, well, in the New York City area, because now I live like 6 miles from Manhattan, um, and have moved away from Long Island. I am now getting married and with my undergrad sweetheart. So yeah, things have a move happened. Some things happened in 2 years, but your book is in libraries here in
Hmm.
North Jersey. It's the audiobook is incredible, read by you, which I was so
Yeah.
excited when I heard your voice. And a lot of academics don't have that visibility with their published work. So I mean, that is your public presence is very different than traditional academia.
Yeah. And it's one of the things that I do enjoy the most is hearing um, that people are reading it and they're enjoying it and they're like, I feel like I learn a lot. some people were like, this book feels like it comes with homework because there's like so many things that I write about and talk about in movies and books and portraits. So I'm happy to have been able to, with these two books especially, create a kind of accessible version of academia. So like everything that I wanted to do, but my friends can read it and they've said they've enjoyed it. I'm taking their word for it. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
been fun.
So, you talk a lot about, I love that you go into Stephen Sondheim's company. You go always like you bring that, what we would call, I guess, auto theory when you imbue like the high and low culture together and you create a type of memoir sense of your voice. But right, like I love that you bring in pop culture. I think that it makes a lot of sense. It helps you probably talk through your ideas about cruising or the bathhouses or right chance encounters, Craigslist. I just remember when Craigslist had those like
Yeah,
no strings.
misconnections or
Yeah.
like yeah, you
So
were M for M, yeah.
yes, yes, I remember. Um, I was in that like right when Grinder was starting, but Craigslist had still, you know, there were some still ads that were floating around.
Yeah,
Do you
personals we call them, yeah.
the personals, thank you. So do you feel that the pop culture, like what does that allow you to get to that like you just fixating on say a theoretical idea just wouldn't have the same effect? I was recently watching Return to Oz and Nosferatu with my fiance, and I thought, wait, I just had on Broadview Press authors who wrote a vampire literature anthology and the iconic edition of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. So I said to my fiance, you know what? I need to tell everyone who's listening to ITBR that BroadviewPress.com has everything from classic novels to discussions about vampire literature, vampires in film and TV, the philosophy of sports, Native American culture, horror. There is so much on Broadview Press's website. I urge you all right now, search broadviewpress.com. You will see that not only do they have books for college instructors, which if you do teach college, you better add them to your list because it's amazing, all the resources they have. But if you have just wandered around a bookstore or a library and thought, everyone always told me to read Moby Dick, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to fully understand it. Broadviewpress.com has you covered because they have amazing notes and sources to help you dissect that huge whale of a tale. See what I did there? I was just watching the Page Master, so there's a little Moby Dick reference. Head to broadviewpress.com, use the exclusive code they gave us, Ivory Tower, 20% off your entire order. Yes, your entire order. Enjoy your reading, and please reach out to me and let me know what you're reading from Broadview Press. I would love to share it on social media.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this has always been biographical because like pop culture and movies and TV shows and even the books that I've read, those were the ways and the moments and the scenes and the objects that allowed me to think through my own ideas, to think through my own identity, to think through self-fashioning, right? Like it was seeing myself or not seeing myself on screen that allowed me to sort of question a lot of what I was being fed in these kinds of stories. So for me, criticism has always been involved with how we encounter these cultural objects. So it's I don't know how to do criticism without it. I don't know how to do writing without it because it's sort of so embedded and imbricated in how I think and how I think about myself. And so I it it's always the first place I turn to. And so it's always a lot of fun because then it allows me to do these kinds of like meta conversations, which is not just to talk about cruising as a concept, as a historical marker, as a kind of practice, but how is it that we depict cruising? How is it that we've been taught about cruising? How is it that we make cruising circulate within the cultural imaginary? And so to be able to have those two conversations, I think pop culture is a great fertile ground for that. Because then we're not just talking about the thing, we're talking about how the thing is represented. And then the choices that are being made in that representation tell us a lot about how we're supposed to feel about it. And then those of us who maybe are outside of it can make that very visible. And so I love that moment. So like not just talking about the thing, but talking about the representation of the thing and sort of going back and forth. Um, and it's also just more fun, and it gives you. I find it does open up my writing in a way because I'm talking to things that other people can talk about. Like if I'm talking about Titanic, a lot of people have seen Titanic. So when I'm
Yes.
talking about figure drawing and portraiture and intimacy, and I can say like, like that scene in Titanic, and they're like, oh my God. Or meeting a stranger and I say, oh, before sunset, and immediately people sort of understand. So there's a kind of like short circuiting and a kind of shorthand that I really appreciate.
Well, and I love that you use the word musings on modern intimacy. Like that word muse is so ancient Greek inspired. I just think of Hercules and the muses, but
Yes.
right,
Yeah.
like, what's that idea of, like, why did you go with that concept of musing?
I I love a nice I love to think about the rhythm of the title. And so the modern musings on modern, like I love the double M. But I wanted, because these are, I struggle with authority and I struggle with giving myself the voice of authority. So I didn't want it to be a study on modern intimacies because that
Mm.
would feel sort of like very uh, sort of scientific and sort of very structured. And I thought about meditations on modern intimacies,
Mm.
but that
Mm.
also that felt a little sort of like wooey and sort of new agey. But I love musings because it allows for it's kind of ephemeral, and it's kind of uh, bubbly, and it's a kind of conversation, and it's also not giving you answers. Like I didn't this is not a book that it's not a how-to book and it's not a research kind of book. It's more of like, let's follow these ideas and let's bring up these questions. And so musings felt like, I just love just the musicality of it, and so it felt really well suited to the kinds of um, discussions that I was having in the book.
Yeah. Well, something that's interesting is when we were talking about Queer as Folk, I don't think it's in Hello Stranger unless.
It is not.
Okay, okay. So, how long have you known about Queer as Folk? I'm assuming that you knew about it when it came out in the 2000s.
I did. I was in college. I was in Vancouver and I was mostly familiar with the US version. Um, and I still remember friends of mine that had like the DVD box sets as they came out every season. And so I must have seen it all the way through. Although as I was like I know season one really well, and I also realized as I was rewatching these two episodes, I was like, oh, right. Of course I would know the show because it was like nudity and
Mhm.
sex. And it was like as like a recently out 19-year-old, it was like so exciting. This wasn't Will and Grace, like right? Like this was like they're in assless chaps, they're in a leather ball, they're being tied up,
Mhm.
or they're um I still have such vivid and visceral memories of seeing that first pilot episode and seeing that first moment when the sex scene and sort of like the close up of Justin's butt, and it was just like
Yes, yes.
it was so seminal to the way also that our friends and I sort of talked about it. So, but I hadn't seen it since. Like, it's one of those like I probably watched it a lot during my undergrad years, but it's now probably been like 20 years since I looked at any of these episodes.
Yeah, so what I find so interesting, like anytime I have a guest on to talk about Queer as Folk, is it's such like it feels both relevant but also nostalgic at the same time. Like the fantasy elements of it. I mean, like I have to pick your brain and ask you, Manuel, what do you think of the way that BDSM is even shown, like the leather scene? Like it feels um what is that word? Kitschy or you know,
Yeah, I mean, I'm
It's
of two minds because
campy.
part of it,
Yeah.
it's a little campy, but one of the things, this was sort of a fantasy, right? Also, like they're in Pittsburgh, but they didn't shoot in Pittsburgh. So it's
Hmm.
like this was very obviously not, I almost feel like not an American city.
Yeah.
And I
I
think
think if I remember, it's Toronto.
it's Toronto. And like if you've been down Church Street, like you're just like, oh, this is obviously sort of Toronto, which also, because I was in Vancouver, I also had that. And Vancouver has a very similar kind of gay strip that looks almost very much like the one in Chris Folk. But as I was watching it, especially with a leather ball, it's like, oh yeah, this is this heightened version of what this is. And this is a kind of like TV version of what this is. But what I came away from thinking about it was like, oh, this is actually quite accurate. I mean, it is, there's a sense of like, you had, I couldn't believe that in the early 2000s we had on Showtime a TV show that was showing like a guy getting on a sling and someone like lubing up, like getting ready to lube them up, and then the camera would just be tracking this
Mhm.
dark room during a leather ball. That again, for someone who's been in sort of similar spaces and sort of in dark rooms here in LA, like that feels not like that's what a lot of those places look like. And that the show actually wasn't being lurid, or it is campy, but but it still takes it seriously, right? Like that moment when um you are supposed to take this seriously, and it's the people who don't follow the rules, right? Like, don't call me daddy, get away, I'm not consenting to this. Like that in a way feels now still in 2025 quite radical. And that there was a sort of like celebration of a kink. I mean, like that's another way of thinking about it. Like when we think about these conversations that we have about like leather and pride or kink and pride, it was like here was like a banner queer series that was like putting you front and center and having its actors be like fully decked out in leather and leather thongs and leather assless chaps, and talking about how they were going to be someone's daddy or someone's slave, or that they were going to be let themselves be tied up like that. No matter how vampy and campy it was, it still feels so uh, it was just so lovely to see it. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a kind of similar show in 2025 that is doing anything remotely as sexy, and to sort of deal in those spaces without a kind of like distancing or didactic, or a kind of like more like, we're not going to show you anything and we're not going to show any kind of sex, and our sex is just going to be like suggested. That was never the case with Chris Folk. Like it was always front and center.
Well, the most queer male thing going on right now is the White Lotus brothers incestuous theme. I mean, are you watching this season?
I I am watching. I'm actually recapping it for the AV Club. So I've been
Oh,
like
okay.
like writing 1,500 words per episode and sort of like really dissecting it, and right, and even just the reaction to just Mike White doesn't really show us a lot, but the reaction to that is being like, holy, oh my god, how are they showing this on HBO? Which is like, I don't know, you gave us Game of Thrones, this doesn't feel that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that explicit compared to like Queer as Folk or
Right.
Sex in the City, even. Like, I've
Yeah.
seen some of the Sex in the City episodes, and I'm like, oh, wow, that was actually, you know, pretty racy stuff or pretty like salacious, sexual, sensual themes that they were doing. I mean, it is called
Yeah.
Sex in the City, right? Shock
Yeah.
value was part of its game. But
Absolutely.
yeah, and Queer as Folk is the same time as Sex in the City. Like some say it's the gay version of Sex in the City with
Right.
this like
Yeah.
core group of friends. I mean, something that I always just enjoy watching this show is I feel a little um like I missed out not having this core group. I'm like, am I gonna
Hmm.
have this like group of five guys and we're all, gonna conquer the world together? But then, something that I am glad that they showed in these episodes is the dynamic about what happens when you're in a committed relationship and what happens when someone still is communicating with a person that they were in love with. Like, how do you have a gay friend who
Hmm.
you clearly know that your partner is into them and you're in a monogamous relationship, right? Like, that's the whole David not enjoying that Michael
Yeah.
continues to talk to Brian. I mean, that does seem pretty relevant. Like that's something my fiance and I talk all the time about is I'm like, "Oh, we should, get more gay couple friends." And he'll say, "Well, they know that we're in a monogamous relationship, right?" And I'm like, "I think so." Not to like, divulge too much. And he's also sleeping in the other room, but he might wake up if
When
I'm
he
too
hears
loud.
his ears
Oh yeah,
itching,
yeah, yeah. He has the
the
spidey
stuff
senses.
burning. Yeah,
But right, like how I mean, you're in a throuple. I've learned this now about you, Manuel.
you do learn a
But
lot about me in this book.
I've
Yes.
learned a lot in the book. But how have you navigated just the whole gay friend dynamic?
Yeah, I think it's one of those. I mean, I do have an entire chapter on queer friendship because I do think is it's both in an underexplored and yet a such a prevalent mode of relationship in our communities that I think like as I read in the book, like queer friendship is kind of elastic because it does sort of it's very capacious as a concept because they can be just sort of like someone that you like really connect with or somebody you go to brunch with, but also someone that you can have like kind of erotic, platonic sort of feelings for.
Mm.
And I do think that as queer folks, and I think again, as if you follow the entire queer folk over the seasons, like there are moments when like friends to become lovers or not, and then they have to sort of negotiate how that friendship and those boundaries and those limits. So here you say you get a little bit of that, and again, Brian and Michael are sort of the obvious example, which is like where do you draw the line, and what happens when one of you is like very clearly friend zoning you.
Mm.
uh, but I what I wanted to do in the book, what I think I've been trying to practice sort of in my own life, and it is a little bit of a struggle, and it is sort of one of these things that I have to remind myself is that uh, those limits can be more porous. And one of the things that I try to do in the book is try to imagine what would it feel like to blur those lines a little bit and to not feel so precious about, well, a friend is this and a lover is that and a stranger is this other thing and a family member or someone who's kin, but what would it mean to sort of be more open and more
Mm.
porous and to allow that friendships could spill over into something else and still remain friendships. I think this idea that um, anyone that you're attracted to is going to be either a threat to your relationship or that's going to encourage you to then create a love story with them. I think that's a lot of these stories that we're being fed. And I think there's so many ample examples. And I think Queer as Folk is one of them of like the expansiveness of what friendship can be that can be at times erotic and at times chaste and that it can change from week to week or year to year and that you can renegotiate that within your friendships and also within your partner.
Yeah. Do you feel like being in a throuple, but then you get, Manuel gets into his whole journey of being married and, having
And then
an
not.
aff yeah, then not being married, having an affair and like being very honest.
Well,
Well,
not an affair. This
okay.
affair is not a word that I would use. Having cheated because it was not. I think an affair suggests like I was like I met someone and then we were like stowing away and like for months at a time and I was texting with like it was like discrete sort of moments, um not I didn't have a lover or a mistress or
Like you didn't have
a
someone that you were continuously
no,
seeing. Yeah, yeah.
no.
Okay, no, thank you for that clarification. The semantic differences between affair
Yeah.
and cheating. But right, what was that like, as comfortable as you are sharing about it? I mean, you do a lot more discussion of it, so everyone will have to read the book, but is that something you were able to um talk openly about right after the cheating happened, or is it something like you've had to process over the years? Summer's almost here, and as a lover of literature, bookstores, libraries, the constant question I get is, Andrew, what book should I add to my summer reading list and read at the beach this summer? And I just always had a problem trying to tell people what to read. But guess what? no more. I have a magazine that has become my best friend. It is the G&LR, the Gay and Lesbian Review, a bi-monthly magazine of all things LGBTQ arts and culture. Their current issue is called The First Homosexuals, and it is guest edited by Dr. Jonathan D. Katz, who is a professor at the University of Penn. He was the founding president of New York's Leslie Lohman Museum of Gay and Lesbian Art, which, if you've never been there, is a free museum. So definitely go there. It's in Soho and it's amazing. Back to the GNLR. This new edition is so exciting to read. It looks at how the term homosexuality is an invented term. It was invented by medical scientists in the late Victorian period. So I can't wait to read all of these articles, but there's articles talking about homosexuality in Japan, Russia, Canada, Paris, India, Argentina. And Jonathan D. Katz talks about his exhibition called The First Homosexuals, now on display in Chicago's Wrightwood Museum from May 2nd to July 26th. But I can't get to Chicago this summer, so I'm so happy that I get to look through the magazine and see all of the articles that Jonathan has put together with contributing writers. I'm interviewing Jonathan soon, so look out for that episode, everyone. The GNLR has given me an exclusive promo code. Write it down, everyone. It's ITBR Choice, and you get a free issue with your subscription. So, glreview.org, go to the subscribe section, ITBR Choice, you get a free issue, and I can't wait for you all to enjoy the GNLR as much as I do. Please let me know if you're reading the GNLR, and until next time when I have Jonathan D. Katz on.
Oh, there was a lot of therapy that led to me being able to think through this book and then being able to share about it. And this is when I'm like, there's a lot in my life that is not in the book because it's very intentional what I share. So I share, for instance, that there were instances of cheating, but I don't give you sort of the story, which is why it makes sense that there's a kind of um, clarification needing to be made. But yeah, it required a lot of therapy, a lot of talking to friends, a lot of introspection, a lot of trying to figure out like, okay, so like what was it that was not working, or what was it that I was needing or wanting, and that I didn't feel that I could express or feel comfortable doing that. And of course, taking that as a kind of a self-criticism in the sense that like I should have been more open, I should have been more honest, I should have allowed myself to uh, voice those desires rather than calcifying them or tucking them away, or you know um, thrusting them onto a stranger that I was sexting with, for instance, and not telling my husband, who obviously was under the assumption that we were sort of monogamous, and sort of even just the ability to think through that and then saying, okay, so that clearly did not work, and that blew up my life in a lot of ways. What would it mean to create different dynamics and different relationships, and with both my friends, with both strangers, and with my boyfriends now? And so it required, especially at the beginning, a lot of soul searching, and like I said, like a lot of a lot of therapy. And then when I embarked on this new sort of relationship with these two guys that I'm seeing, is it then required being like very upfront and very open, and being very encouraged to not get caught up in those boundaries, those limits, those kind of like very rigid ways in which we could think about what we were building, but then the kinds of bonds that we could create with um, other people around us and in different spaces.
So what I'm about to ask, I know is going to be an invasive question. So if you just want to say like, shut the fuck up, Andrew, I'm not offended. Uh, but like having um cheated, or like the part that just didn't work out in your marriage, um, did that have anything to do with feeling confined by being monogamous?
Oh, yes. And it took a long time to realize that that's what was wrong, or like, right, I think um it's so easy to look back and be like, oh, that was the problem. And part of the problem was like that I didn't realize that that's why I was feeling claustrophobic.
Mm.
That I couldn't, I don't think I had the language, or I had the sort of the self-awareness or this wherewithal to sort of have voiced it that way. And I mean, I also say, like, I don't think I was brave enough to sort of even imagine a way outside of the world and the way outside of the relationship that I had created, that I thought I'd wanted, that I was really enjoying parts of it, that was really, really working. Um, but yeah, looking back, I've realized that monogamy in the way that I understood it in my marriage was very constricting and restricting, and that was, causing me hurt, and I was causing hurt in turn. And so part of, I joked with my agent when I first pitched him this book. I was like, this is my divorce book. And he was, horrified and was really worried for me. He was like, are you going to be able to work through this? Because you knew that it would require a kind of openness and catharsis, and it would
Mhm.
require sort of like this kind of soul searching. But I was like, no, I think I can do that. So I'm now at a point where I can talk openly about it. But like, yeah, uh, it's tough in the moment, and then it's only been, years and years of rewiring myself and rewiring how I think about intimacies, that now I'm able to see things that were happening then a lot clearer.
Well, something that like I noticed, like going through your book and preparing to talk with you, and like you just, I feel really help queer men think through our personal relationships. Even though I know like you're not a relationship counselor, but you like just really help, I think, understand our awareness to like queerness, and specifically queer manhood is such an interesting phenomenon. I think that um with my fiance, I can relate to parts of Queer as Folk, like the fantasy elements, or you
Hmm.
know, when you have those discussions about like a stranger kind of has the slippery, there's blurriness. And I know Zachary
Yeah.
Zane, who I've had on here, who
Yeah.
wrote Boy Slut, and he has that great blurb for your book, like even talks about that. Um, like just questioning the messiness, or like who really is a stranger when it comes to sexual escapades or cruising.
Yeah.
And I think about, sometimes the role playing that I do with my fiance is really exciting, right? Like there are ways to make the monogamy, um, there's always ways to make it kinky, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. And one of the things that I shouldn't say this, and but I sometimes feel I need to say it, was like, this is not a book, this is not an anti-monogamy book. This is
yeah, yeah.
not a book about how, like, oh, this is wrong. To me, it's about, to your point, like, it's examining and it's questioning. And I think just recognizing that all these are choices. Monogamy is a choice. I think it's only a problem when you see it as a default, when you see it as sort of the normal, as you see it as the only choice. Because if you're seeing it as the only choice, then you're not really making a choice. But if you are seeing what's out there, or if you have explored what's out there, and you're still making a choice, like the monogamy is the thing that's working for you for a myriad of reasons, logistic, romantic, cultural, whatever. But if it's a choice that you're making and you're emboldened by it and you're satisfied by it and you're made happy about it, and you find, to your point, like all these different ways of making it work for you, like all power to you. Like, and sort of, I just, one of the things that I wanted with the book is like to sort of understand that a lot of these things that we think are natural or normal or common sense, it might be good to sort of question them, even if you still make the same choices after. But it's enriching to just look at the fantasy and then not think that you deciding to choose outside of that is somehow wrong or um, not necessary.
Yeah, like you don't want um that like gay gossipy queen stereotype. I know that's a stereotype, but for them to like point their finger and look down and say, "Oh, my monogamous marriage is so superior to what you're doing," or "You're
Yeah,
degrading the image of gay men," or like that whole
yeah.
respectability politics.
Right. Which I do not have any time for, but
Yeah. No, no. And I think like that's so judgmental and not necessary. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because like a lot of our couple friends are actually straight, and like your book started to have me think through, um, like we do have gay couple friends, but you know, there are different questions to ask. Like when you
yeah.
are in a relationship, or I'm sure even like, you know, in your throuple relationship, that like when you're going to bring other guys, like even you're going to all go out to get drinks or you're all going to go to dinner, like, right? The dynamic just shifts or changes because, you know,
I
I don't
agree.
know.
Yeah,
Like, how do you handle that?
it's funny because it's now so foreign to me. Like I don't. I guess yeah, some dynamics would change, but I maybe I'm just so divorced from straight culture, and also I think this also speaks to a kind of urban centers, and I think why this is why queer as folk we wanted to bring it back. Uh, it ends up being such a fascinating both time capsule, but it's also a spatial capsule. Like this is those kinds of friendships, those kinds of dynamics are only made possible in these kind of gay enclaves that you have in places like Toronto and
Yeah.
Vancouver, San Francisco, New York, Chicago, um, Los Angeles. But like, I imagine that's harder to find in Long Beach, in Long Island, in
Mm.
maybe San Diego's not a good choice, but like there are certain cities where that might be harder to do. And I do wonder how, in a post-COVID sort of world, where a lot of those gay strips have been struggling, and with places closing and bars closing, and where that kind of community building that does happen because we're all having a kind of shared experience that's a kind of very urban, upperly mobile kind of experience, why that might feel different. And again, if the only things that you're then coming into contact with are these like straight couples who have already a kind of vision of the world that's kind of heteronormative or heteronormalized, that might be sort of hard to then. It would feel like the dynamics would change if you're then bringing in more gay male friends, or if you're then imagining how to import that part of your life or that kind of dynamic into a more sort of gay friendly or gay effusive or kind of more prideful community based world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're near Jersey City, so it's not that like we have a lot of LGBTQ visibility. I think it's more that my fiance and I are just picky when it comes to who we want to hang out with, who's gay. But if any of our gay friends are listening, you know, I'm not
It's not
making
them. Yeah.
judgments. But well, also I think too, it depends on, you know, um, right, like we're also at that new stage of we've been together going on a year and a half, newly engaged. I mean, we've known each other a long time, but when you're starting to introduce each other to your friend groups and like thinking of who are you going to blend together, it's kind of more um, of, oh, should like we meet new gay couple friends, or should we like try to make things work with the gay couples we already know? And
Mhm.
that's, I don't know, it's a push and a pull because also I think it depends on your hobbies, like what you all like to do. And like some of our gay couple friends want to go um to like underwear night at Daniel Nardicchio's place, the one who owns the Ice Palace.
Yeah.
Blanking on the name of the place in the city that he also owns, but um, you know, like that
Or
maybe might not.
jock night at the Eagle. Yeah.
Yeah, jockstrap night at the Eagle, right? Like for us, that might not be our vibe, but like trivia night at the
Mm.
Dickens or somewhere in Hell's Kitchen, like sign us up for that, you know? So it's just thinking of what activities do we want to do. But
Yeah.
you know, that's a digression. So, you know, with Queer as Folk though, like, was there anything? Because I definitely have my own view with this, but was there anything where your eyebrows just raised and you thought, "Wow, this is either offensive or just really pandering to even maybe a straight audience? Like, we're gay and we need to really make this understandable to you."
Well, not really. I mean, the thing that surprised me more was like that leather ball and how kind of again, it's not explicit, but how unafraid it was to sort of be like, yeah, no, we're showing someone getting flogged. Like, and that it's not, you do have a character within the show being like, oh my God. But of course, then his narrative is all about how he needs to embrace that and how maybe how that kind of initial dismissal has to do something with like that he was recognizing something of himself. Um, what I had forgotten was how much it functioned as this kind of both like a primetime melodrama, right? Like this is a primetime soap for all intents and purposes. But also how wholesome, which is this weird word to use when we're talking about like there's a leather knight and there's a flogging, but that it did function as a sort of kind of um, modeling this kind of queer found community and found and chosen family that you know in sort of tenor and sensibility is not that different from those like family dramas that you were watching. Like I kept thinking of like Seventh Heaven as sort of like this is a kind of like queer Seventh Heaven, which is like a weird thing to say because they
Mm.
like don't. But this focus on like we care for one another, we're going to be there for one another, we are this family. So like if someone needs to take care of the baby, someone like the stakes are all about how can we take care of one another,
Yeah.
right? We're afraid because one of our friends is going through conversion therapy and that's not really great for him. And sort of there's a kind of like after school specialness to a lot of those storylines that I had forgotten were so central. And I think that's why I don't think of it as being marketable to street people, but I think it was a kind of way of modeling like, oh, we have also these kinds of stories to tell that
Mm.
are about how we can enrich our lives and how we can learn and model those kinds of things. So it may leave some of you, I mean, like, oh, I kind of do wish I had those kinds of friends, that kind of network and that kind of support group and that kind of community. And, it's the same way like when I used to watch Friends and I was like, oh, I wish I had like a coffee shop that me and my friends would all go to, or like Seinfeld, where like you drop into someone else's house. And this is sort of the same thing. Like they all go to this diner and they all go to this bar and they have this like space for community. I don't know when they have work or I don't know when they like earned any money, but it's so great that like that kind of socializing and caretaking is at the center of it. And I think that I'd forgotten how central that was to sort of the show, despite its sort of very outlandish and sexual and racy and kind of out there storylines. And we're just on season one. They get so much crazy, so crazy, so much
They
so
do. They
crazier
do.
they as they go on.
Well, and also it's interesting that they will make fun of each other, but rarely do you see them disrespect someone else in the gay community. Like they're
Yeah,
not um they don't have that stereotype of a Hell's Kitchen gay acts like this, a West
yeah,
Hollywood gay at the Abbey, you better watch out for them, they're judging the way that you look. Like they don't really have that aesthetic of judgment, and I'm curious like if
yeah.
that was an intentional choice or
If you think about it historically, that makes sense because it does feel like a kind of like big tent community, right? Like even just the fact that all of them sort of fall into like different kinds of stereotypes and archetypes of the gay community, but the idea that these obstacles are always coming from the outside or the way that they're like interacting the outside and interpolate it into sort of how family creates friction, but like even those moments of friction that are so like neatly tied together. But I think it was this moment where like there was a galvanizing around that sense of community that cut across um, any kind of differences that may exist within the community because there was this need to sort of present this like unified front against, because we're talking about like the late 90s, early 2000s, and sort of the way that the tide was changing. And so this idea of like presenting a diversified but unified version of the gay community must have felt sort of very uh, not politically savvy, but like it feel like it was mirroring the kind of activism that was happening sort of on the streets at the time.
what does Sunset Boulevard, The Sound of Music, Vertigo, Snow White, The Wizard of Oz, and even Rebecca have in common? they've been covered on my friend Christian Garcia's podcast called That Old Gay Classic Cinema. Every time he is researching and deep diving a film with his guests, he asks the question, what's so queer about this film? You're going to love his podcast. You can listen to it on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and follow him on Instagram and TikTok at That Old Gay Classic Cinema. I hope you all enjoy it as much as I do. Yeah, I mean, is there anything that's come across your desk since you're always looking at new films or TV shows? I mean, um, I'm gonna do an episode coming out deep diving Queer the film. So
Mm,
you know, which definitely some have their thoughts on it. Maybe it
yeah.
wasn't as much of a buzzworthy film as it could have been. I think Wicked, took over the queer zeitgeist, but I'm a Wicked fan. That's okay. But is there anything that you feel really is um, commenting nicely on the gay community right now?
Well, there's two things. So coming out on Hulu is Mid-Century Modern, which is the new sitcom
That's the Matt
starring
Bomer one, right? With
Matt
Nathan
Bomer,
Lane.
Nathan Lane, and Nathan Lee Graham, created by the same duo that created Will and Grace.
Mm.
And it imagines these like three older men in Palm Springs, and it is again this sort of like chosen family kind of story, racier than I think I had anticipated. So that's the one that comes to mind because
Ooh.
I also I think it'd be worth thinking about like the Queer as Folk reboot that I think was trying to do sort of like an even more expansive version of this queer community that I thought I was doing it really well. But something else that's coming up soon is the Wedding Banquet, the remake of the Ang Lee film from the '90s that uh, paints a picture, again, not unlike what we see in Queer as Folk, which is like this lesbian couple is wanting to um, have a baby, and then their queer male sort of neighbors are going to help in exchange of being able to
Mm.
create this like fake wedding for a one of their families. But what I loved about the film is that it really paints a portrait of chosen family in this very modern queer millennial sort of way where they're all adrift and careers aren't really going where they're supposed to be going and they're sort of don't know how to commit or how to imagine futures, but the way they do it and end up doing it is by like really leaning into one another and creating this like blended sort of modern family.
Mm. Well, I have to say, I think that to me, that's one of the strongest storylines in Queer as Folk is the chosen family, the Melanie, Lindsay, Brian, Justin of it all. And like, I'm not one, I'm always waiting for like, when am I gonna like, my tear ducts are gonna start going and flowing. And like, I did really feel emotional with Brian's father holding Gus at the end. I thought there was something really, interesting there with like Brian looking at the photo of his father holding him and there's like that whole the dual narrative aspect, but I did think they did such a beautiful job of without the father explicitly saying like I accept you for who you are,
Right.
you're my gay son, right? Which some might have wanted it that explicit. The acceptance was there even though the father was
Yeah.
extremely confused about what this his grandson, how the grandson came to
Right.
be. But yeah, like what did you think of the way that Gus plays a role, like this whole fatherhood aspect?
Yeah, I mean he is sort of the anchor, right? Like he's the precipitate like the pilot episode is all about Gus's arrival, right? And it's sort of the way that it's going to change the dynamics between the couple. It's going to change Brian's life, the way that's going to sort of ripple out. And sort of Justin and Gus end up being like the two characters that make the show happen, right? They're the narrative engines immediately from the pilot episode. Um, so it makes sense that we would continue to see the two of them be sort of anchor and orbit throughout sort of the rest of the season. Uh, I love and what in this episode we have all these various storylines about fatherhood, right? Like these different models of how you can father someone else, what do you expect from a father figure, or from a father itself. To me, again, when I think of the show as sort of existing in this kind of genre of like a very special episode, or like the lesson of the week, or that kind of like PSA-ness, like
Yeah.
the fact that it's not explicit, but that, that dad goes from like, oh my God, I can't believe my son's a fairy, to like, oh, I'm gonna hold their their baby in my hand and now we're sort of better. Uh, this isn't drama, like this isn't real life, it's kind of like so rose colored. Uh, and kind of aspirational. And I think this is what we were seeing sort of at the turn of the century. It was like all of these stories we're trying to imagine, we're trying to grapple with the kind of trauma that a lot of us have gone through with our families, and then putting up on screen like, you know, things can like, it's so cliche to say, but like it does get better, and sort of trying to imagine and trying to model like, look, fathers can turn and fathers can change, and in the span of an episode, which is not really that long. Um,
Yeah.
but I think a lot of people were craving that kind of um, acceptance, and those kinds of storylines. So um, it's both sort of jarring to think that like the character arc is so quick, but also given the historical and cultural sort of things that were happening at the time, it sort of feels so appropriate.
Yeah. Well, so I'm just curious, what are your musings on like the way that it's true when like you join any kind of relationship, doesn't matter traditional monogamy, doesn't matter if it's polyamory, a throuple, you know, uh whatever the situationship is, that you're the two or three or however many are bringing their own friendships and their own dynamics, their families sometimes blending together. Like if something happens in that relationship, that impacts the whole community of friends and family. Like depending on how,
Yeah.
much you've entered each other's lives. But, how have you thought about that in or even when it comes to your own life with those dynamics? Like you're part of that's something I think Queer as Folk does so well. Like they're part of each other's lives, like part of each other's tentacles.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that Queer as Folk reminds us is like that sometimes those relationships are the central ones.
Hmm.
So that it's Brian and Michael who have been there for long, like for decades for
Yeah.
one another. And so it's the boyfriend who's now changing that dynamic. And I think sometimes we tend to believe like, well, the romantic live-in partner is the one that takes precedence, and like they're
Mm.
then they become the center. But like what happens when the gravitational pull of the friendship group, of the friend group, or like your family, what happens when you want to have that way more? And so I love that, through the episode, the lesson is not like, yes, you should do whatever your boyfriend wants you to do and you should like adhere to these like rules that he's setting, but it's the understanding that like there are friendships that are going to be valuable and that they may need to be renegotiated, they may need to be reshuffled, but that there's no need to sort of immediately um, disassociate, or that you should immediately deprioritize them. And I think, it's also something that I work a lot in the book, is like this idea of priorities, and this idea of like, well, my partner is here and then everyone else gets second billing. But what happens when we could think of that as a little bit more dynamic, about orbiting one another and gravitational forces, which I'm realizing I'm like talking a lot, because I think it allows for a kind of elasticity and flexibility, so that it's not the strictness of like, I don't want you to see him, or you should not be friends with them, but it's about negotiating that and understanding that there's a push and pull, and that can be site specific or context specific or circumstance specific. Because if this is someone that you've known for decades and who has been there, then to sort of immediately be asked to sort of let them go, or to not care that they may lose their job, um, that is hurtful, and that is sort of, it's a part of you. And a lot of people feel that, with families, or with found families, or with friendships. Um, so that's sort of my musing, is sort of trying to understand that friendships can be, and have been, and for many of us, like, are valuable and invaluable, and sort of like thinking of them as things that then need to fall into place so that I can stay with my boyfriend. Um, and the show suggests it's like that's just not a way forward, and that just suggests a kind of intransigence that we should not be encouraging, and instead we should be sort of more open.
Yeah, no, Lawrence and I, that's my fiance's name. We just like when I heard you talk about um like staying in bed for days, like getting takeout, having so much amazing sex. Like, that honeymoon or the cohabitating phase that really is exciting and
Hmm.
full of a lot of joy. The hardest part for me is, or something that both of us are still working on, is, oh, okay, you can do your thing, I do my thing. We'll see each other at this time. It's gonna be
So
okay.
important. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's sort of this idea, and I talk about this in this book. Like, I think a lot of our language around relationships is very limiting. Like, my better half, my other half, my soulmate. This idea that like you're either supposed to do everything together, or that you're supposed to agree on everything, or that you're supposed to lead one life. When I think the most valuable thing that I've learned over these past few years, and it is hard and it takes work, is understanding that like you are two separate people, and you can have two separate groups of friends and two separate uh, interests, hobbies, pastimes, things that you do, people that you do it with, and that so long as you're still making time for one another, and so long as you're still sort of finding the thing that brings the two together, the fact that you go drinking out with friends and someone else stays behind, or someone goes to a
Mhm.
movie and someone else goes to do something else, um, those are not incompatible. And trying to find the way in which you can still be your own self and pursue your own interests while being invested in a couple, a throuple, a polycule, whatever it is, that is the way in which you are going to thrive. Um, and I think that's just sort of so important. And again, we struggle with that, and we still sort of have to remind ourselves of that. But
Yeah.
yeah.
And then I guess like one last, question, which this flew by, but you know, I knew that our dynamic, we could talk all night, for hours. But how have you thought about whether it's in Hello Stranger, um, or even I know we had touched upon this a little, maybe in the male gaze, but I feel like Hello Stranger, this is more ripe for the picking with this idea, especially with Queer as Folk, is the idea of intergenerational queer friendships, family
Yeah.
relationships. Like, how have you thought about, or even what have you seen since you are in Los Angeles? Um, like my fiance's brother is Gen Z. I've like seen
Hmm.
very different kinds of interesting ways that he's in the queer scene. Um, and that like the whole coming out process was different in the sense that, not that I want to say being queer is taken for granted or that no one cares in Gen Z, but it is a really different openness now with social media. Like, what have you observed and maybe what's interested you about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been changing, and I think one of the things that even as I was writing the book, and why it was important for me to write the book from a very specific historical time. It's like I'm telling my own story, but I'm reaching back to tell these older stories. So like when I'm talking about polyamory and throuples, I didn't want it to feel like this is such a new thing, this is such a 21st century thing. Like instead, I go to like the 30s and the 40s to be like,
Mhm.
people have been doing and thinking about how to create different kinds of dynamics. And I think that's sometimes been lost. And there's a reason, like, I mean, we did lose an entire generation sort of in the 80s and 90s, and then we've lost a lot of spaces where that kind of cross and intergenerational um, passing of ideas were happening. And so, yeah, here in Los Angeles, I enjoy sort of seeing the full breadth of the queer experience. I also spend a lot of time in Palm Springs, so I also see like, you know, talk about jockstrap night. Like it's very different in Palm Springs when everyone is like in their 70s, and sort of they're so um it's kind of inspiring just sort of even just imagine a kind of world where like uh my queer elders are just having a gay old time, on a
I
Tuesday or
imagine
Wednesday night or a
like
Saturday.
caftan tea, but that's my
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes not even a countdown. Again, sometimes just it's less. And I think we sometimes need that more in our pop culture, which is tends to be so youth obsessed. But and I think this is what the new I love that scene of the new Queer as Folk and the reboot where they do have this kind of like cross generational conversations about what it means to be queer today as opposed to what it meant to be queer in the 80s. And there's that like very tense dinner scene. No, I'm not thinking of Queer as Folk, I'm thinking of Tales of the City.
Mm.
Um, the Netflix version where it imagined sort of this very tense dinner party scene with like this older queens and this like young Gen Z who was like, you know, you know, you don't understand my pronouns and you know this kind of like very flippant, but it ended up being like such a fascinating conversation about how we do need to be talking across generations because there's a lot to be learned both ways. And so I'm happy that I live and I move through these two specific cities that allow me to see that sort of front and center.
Yeah. Also, I have to know, did you see Death Becomes Her, the musical?
I did not, but I did see that clip that you sent me for the gaze, which I, again, as someone who played on the word gazed for my own book, it was very, and then it ends with a Judy nod. So it felt like, yes, it
Yes.
felt like it was almost made for me.
Yeah, I was like, I think when I first heard the song, I'm like, this feels very Manuel Betancourt coded. I was like,
Good.
they know, they know this double entendre with gaze and the gaze.
And the
So,
gaze.
Manuel, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on. Um, I can't wait for everyone to get Hello Stranger, Musings on Modern Intimacy. You can get it anywhere books are sold. Um, you can get it the Audible, go support Manuel. The Male Gazed is his other book, and then he has his book on Judy at Carnegie Hall. Um, so where can everyone follow you, Manuel, or anything else you want to plug here?
Yeah, no, that's those are great plugs. Getting the books, getting the audiobook, or getting the ebook wherever books are sold. And you can find me on Instagram at bmanuel and on Blue Sky. But now I'm realizing that I don't know how to. It's bmanuel.social. That's Blue Sky, B Sky. But you can find me on Instagram. Everything else is sort of connected, and that's usually where I'm posting the most.
Okay. And you're gonna open a TikTok, right?
No, this is the talk about a generational thing. I was like, I don't have the time to either be on TikTok or create a TikTok, but maybe
I
one
feel like you
day.
would do so well on TikTok with your
Oh,
like musings. Like you could read sections of your book, you know.
I know that, but then the millennial in me was like, oh, this is a cringe, and I just can't bring myself to do it because but maybe that's what I used to
I don't
do.
know. Okay, well, just throwing it. Well, if TikTok is still around, who knows?
That's true.
Who knows? I'm sure they'll punt that down the road. Okay. Well, thanks so much, Manuel, and it was such a pleasure.
As always, thanks for having me.